You know, we never talked about what happened in the Pacific until what they came out with, right? I mean, a lot of people never heard of MIS group, especially the younger generation. Now, who is this MIS, Eddie, you know? And then I have to explain to them who they are. Because I think at that time, sure, the 100 and the 442, they're the one that was known. They had a reputation.
I think they played a very significant part. Of course, you know all about those in Europe, but in the Pacific, a lot of people, not until the 70s, early 70s, did they know that there were the Nisei, you know, in the Pacific, all the way from the Aleutians down to New Guinea.
I was in military intelligence school when the war broke out, Pearl Harbor. That happened to be on a Sunday. And we were all in San Francisco having a good time when we heard trucks come around with loudspeakers saying, all servicemen return to your base.
December 7th, I was taking my basic then, and my mother taught Japanese school on weekends in Long Beach, and you know all those that taught Japanese school and community leaders were all taken to concentration camp, you know, prison. My mom was taken to San Pedro prison.
Many people were just picked up for no reason at all, just because we had a Japanese face. And so the encounter of prejudice was so deep and so hurting at that time that we couldn't do anything.
I was in the Army, and we couldn't talk to her. And in the meantime, my dad, my brother and sister, they all got taken to camp at Santa Anita, and then went to Poston. And then later on, my mom was released to go to Poston to join the rest of the family. But my mom's got a prison record.
I know.
When you had to leave home, being the first experience, such experience, you know, you really didn't know what to expect. Of course, before that, I had taken a course in Constitution from Mrs. Mercer at PGC, and you wondered what the Constitution was, you know, when that was happening. And so I felt sort of bad about it, but what troubled me was none of my American friends came to say goodbye, you know, see me off.
It was hard to believe that a thing like that was happening in the United States, because all this happened so suddenly, and we weren't aware of the discrimination that existed in the United States.
I was in the internment camp, concentration camp.
Which one?
I was in Jerome, Arkansas. And this was back in 1943, after my loyalty questionnaire. I guess you're going to ask me that, the loyalty questionnaire. Well, I think you realize that when I first went in camp, I was 17, going on 18. In 1943, I registered for the draft. And what happened was, you know, they classified us 4C, which is a classification of enemy alien. And then the Army wondered how can they remedy that, because they can't draft anybody in the camp. Or they can't volunteer. So they came out with a loyalty questionnaire, 27, 28. Briefly they said, will you defend this country against all foe? Well, I think a lot of us Niseis felt, why should we? Why should we respond to that? Because we were treated like, you know, someone without a citizen and all that, deprived. And so we thought it over, but we said, wait a minute, thinking it over, we said, wait a minute, we have no tie with Japan. We know nothing about Japan, except maybe I may know a little bit more because I lived there at one time, which I hated. So we said, I think all of us Niseis got together and said, why don't we prove to this country that we're just as American as the next person? So I think, to make the story short, that's when we said yes. And then right away, 1A classification.
I did not enlist. I was drafted into the service, and so I didn't have a choice. At that time, I was a young kid, And I didn't know what the score was anyway.
I went into the Army, and they put me in the medics. And there was a bunch of medics. All the Japanese Americans were medics. But we were getting, the details we were getting was latrine duty or KP, but the name only was medics.
It is true that when we were drafted, we did not have a choice to what service that we could go into. It was strictly Army. It's strictly infantry.
The thing that made it very disturbing was here he was serving in the United States Army, and they were discriminatory toward us. That my parents couldn't travel, they couldn't do anything. They were stuck in the camps, and they had to do whatever they told them to do.
Well, like I say, I was drafted, and I went to basic down in Texas. And then I asked the colonel if I could be transferred to the 442. And he said, no. He says, your record shows you know some Japanese. He said, how would you like to go to a special school? I thought, special school? I thought, well, what is this special school? What do you do there? He says, well, you would, of course, learn your Japanese and various other tactics you use overseas. And I said, well, what would I be doing? And he says, for example, we'd take you on a submarine, take you off of some location and put you on a pontoon and send you ashore where you'd meet contacts. Or we'd fly you over some jungle and drop you with a parachute, you know, jump out of a plane, and there are contacts down there waiting for you. And I thought, gee, that wasn't too interesting to me.
Some of it was location, and when they were going to attack where, this type of thing. So this gave the American troops advantage because they knew what was happening. So this is the type of work that the Nisei MIS fellows did, to get the information as much as you can.
When the war broke out, they didn't know what to do with us because we were going to school to learn military terms in Japanese. So they decided to send us back to Minnesota, back east, to start a new school, in which they did. But in the meantime, I was able to get my current wife back to Michigan, where we were married. I think we were the first Japanese couple to be married in a military establishment.
We got married in the chapel, and Colonel Wilkinson brought a car with a chauffeur, and we proceeded to go to the chapel and get married with only chair and a very few witnesses, because we couldn't get people to come to the chapel at that time. It was a very lonely thing because I didn't have my family, and we had to do what we could with what we had.
Training up in, we went to Camp Savage first, and then we closed Camp Savage and went on to Fort Snelling, and that's where I completed my training. And then in 1945, I finished my training, and then I went overseas to the Philippines.
Of course, the reason why, too, that people weren't aware of us is we weren't as a unit, you know. There were just a few number with each company, battalion, or whatever. And and one other reason why I think it was sort of like kept in secrecy is if the Japanese soldiers would have found out that we were part of the U.S. Army, they probably would have shot us right there as being traitors, you know. Yeah, I have a good feeling that would have happened.
When you find the MIS Nisei fellows, a lot of people think that you know, they had it made, right? No danger, nothing, because you're not encountering the enemy that much, but that wasn't the case because you were in danger because you could have been shot by anybody, the enemy, the foe, natives, and these are some of the things that could have happened to you. So one of the things that people don't realize that we always had a GI with us who was armed, and he escorted us all over.
Right. He luckily had a bodyguard that was watching him because he's Japanese American, and we were fighting the enemy, and they looked like him. So I think Garibaldi helped him in a lot of instances where he was, if he was mistaken as an enemy, he was ever to protect him.
I was sent out by myself, and I had to join this organization, and without warning, they said that they are about to make a landing. So I went and made the landing on the 7th wave. So the first wave got in easily, the second wave got in, but when it got to about the 6th or 7th wave, when I went in, we started to find shells coming. I got to the land with a bodyguard with me because, my features were Japanese and we were fighting the Japanese. They had a bodyguard with me. But when we made the landing, I got separated from him because we were supposed to spread out as soon as we make the landing. Anyway, I got out to the right, and the first thing I do is I went into a shell hole. So that night I was in a shell hole with half of it was filled with water. And I was miserable, I tell you. And I didn't have my bodyguard, didn't know who to talk to or anything. So that night I didn't sleep a wink. But it was one of the longest nights I ever had.
Prisoners that we had, they were treated real good. They were really treated good. I know some of them were making money because they made little guitar with wood they carved out, and it's simple to make, I imagine, but they were selling it for $1 a piece, and the guys are all lining up buying it,
Then mistreat them. And this is what they were expecting, the prisoners. Being killed because of what? Even though they were captured, they were going to be tortured and all this type of thing. The prisoners felt this way because because they've heard of propagandas. They had propagandas given to them that the Americans are monsters, barbarians. And so when we encountered them, I don't think they could even look at us. But one of the things that we utilized was kindness.
Going back to my interrogating the prisoner of war, I thought of this psychological warfare, and I thought, hey, maybe I should use another approach. And I did. What I did was say, I like Japanese enka, popular songs, Japanese popular songs. And there's one called Futari wa Wakai, we two are young. And I start singing that, and my wife calls me, she says I'm an onchi. I can't carry a tune, but I did my best. And I sang it, and toward the end of that song, he was sort of humming like he was keeping tune. And I thought, oh boy,
As I interrogated a general, lieutenant general, and he looked down his nose at me, and he was so arrogant, and he said to me, yeah, you fellows are Niseis. You are traitors to our cause. And I just ignored him. I said, one thing I'm doing is I'm asking you a question. That's all I want is a straight answer. None of this other, I said words that I shouldn't say,
Initially, I think they had this attitude, well, you're a traitor. They couldn't understand why we were in the U.S. Army. And so I had to tell them, I was born and raised here. I had never been to Japan. I don't even know my grandparents. And so it was difficult for them to understand my situation. It was hard to get them to realize the war is practically over. You know, the atom bomb had been dropped. Of course, we didn't know how destructive that atom bomb was either. And they never realized what was going on. And so they didn't want to believe it. Of course, they were trained that way, you know. And to be caught as a prisoner of war was a shame for them.
Long commit suicide. They put a grenade to their stomach or put a rifle in their mouth and pull the trigger with their toes, and it was a mess. We felt sorry for them.
At that time, most of Tokyo and Yokohama was devastated. The big buildings were all bombed out. The people would clean it all out, and you'll find a building standing on one side, and the other thing would be an empty lot, and it was cleaned off because people would come to pick up any debris or anything like that, because they used it to build their own home on the outskirts.
When I went to Japan, after the war ended and all that, as an occupation, that's when it shows, because I saw the devastation, I saw what the people were going through, and I felt, they're my so-called roots, right? The ancestors. Then you show your emotions toward the people, and what can I do to help them? I mean, I think that's what the Niseis did.
A lot of the people in Japan were starving, and so if I ever got a chance, I would take some of the excess K rations, C rations, and I would take them out and to give to the people.
I remember in Yokohama, the silk mill, where we'd eat and go out and throw our leftovers into this garbage can, and with our our mess kits, we'd clean it with the soap water in another garbage can, and there'd be like these mothers there. I remember seeing, I can't forget this one lady that had this baby on her back. Her clothes were just dirty, She had this can, she was scooping stuff out of that garbage can and feeding it to her baby. And the baby had scabs all over her face, arms and legs, And her young son, he must have been 4 or 5 years old, trying to get into that garbage can like this. He'd grab whatever's in there, and he's going to start eating it like that. I couldn't sleep that night.
I feel very proud of what the Niseis did. I always like to say the Niseis, in the Pacific, the 6,000 that were there, because it wasn't an individual effort, it was sort of a team effort type of thing that we did. We kind of helped each other.
Well, they say that because of the MIS, the war was shortened 2 years.
In Japan, on the other side, they had mentioned the fact that because of the ability of the Japanese to translate documents, that they saved a great deal of lives, American lives, through the campaigns itself, because they were able to translate a lot of the documents which indicated the welfare of the Japanese at that time. So I feel that the Niseis, or the Japanese Americans, has contributed a great deal toward to the benefit and the victory of the United States against their enemies.
I think they really proved themselves to America that we were no different than anyone else, that we were Americans. You know, we put America first.